Hello and welcome to the No Ceilings NBA Draft Show. Today is a deep dives episode. I am your co-host Nick. Always is my co-host Paige Otto. Paige, how are you doing this fine afternoon?
I'm doing great, Nick. Welcome back. You had some fun in New York. Happy to talk hoops with you again this week.
Yeah, it was brief little trip, but I did get a chance to go back home, aka Yankee Stadium. So always nice when I get to say that. But yeah, fun brief little trip that was expertly planned to be me leaving literally the day after the national championship game.
Nice little reset. Quick
Yeah, there
reset.
you go. Little, get everything back in order before we dive into the real depths of the draft here. So, as mentioned last week, but just another quick housekeeping note as a reminder, we will be pushing up slightly in terms of the prospects we're covering, but not all that much. So, we'll be talking about some of the first round guys, but again, until we get to June or so, it's not going to be the Darren Petersons and the Cam Boozers. And instead, for this week, we actually have a nice little tie together that I didn't realize how well it fit until, a little bit before we started recording. But we are covering arguably the two top international prospects in the draft, except one of them is not quite considered an international prospect for multiple reasons. And those multiple reasons, I think, lend nicely to sort of the trending direction that we're seeing with some international prospects. But I think that's enough preamble. Shall we get to player number one?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the player that I chose for this week is, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty close to 100% sure he will be the only player drafted in the first round of the 2026 NBA draft who did not play for an NCAA team this past season. And that is Karim Lopez of the New Zealand Breakers. And Karim Lopez is an interesting one for me to try and wrap my head around because last year, actually, Ignacio came on the Deep Dives podcast and we did sort of an international prospect rundown. And it was one of those things where, basically Ignacio gave me a list of names of like, here are the guys that I want to focus in on for the NBL. We went down the list of names and then sort of decided, okay, we're going to sort of trade off. Each of us names a prospect until we go through the full list. And both of us agreed that the number one player easily to talk about in that group was Karim Lopez. And fascinatingly enough, a lot of what he showed last season was what he struggled with at the start of this season. And contrarily, a lot of what he struggled with last season, most notably the shooting, was what, until sort of the end where he had a bit of a cold stretch from 3-point range. But for most of the season, he showed a lot more from long distance than he had last season. So it's interesting to sort of look at him in that sense. But I think ultimately where I come down on it is both this year and last year, even though there were a lot of differences in what he showed, the key points that he showed were, I think, going to be the key points of what his NBA profile looks like. And that is as just a big connecting piece who can do a whole lot of things, who maybe isn't ever going to be a 20-point a game scorer. There's a chance, there's an outside chance, there's enough to his downhill game that I don't think it's out of the question. But a lot of the best stuff he does is he's 6'9" and he moves like he's much smaller than that in a good way, right? Not in terms of like, oh, he's not aggressive enough. Like that was one of the things that stood out to me most watching his film last year was him at 17 being as filled with competitive fire, as not only ready to, but willing to attack opponents, especially, when he's getting downhill into the paint. He doesn't have a superlative handle, but he's got a more than good enough handle for a player of his size. And, cold shooting stretch to close out the season aside, him showing what he showed from 3-point range this year makes it a lot easier to sort of, again, fit him into that bucket of maybe he's not, spectacular at any one thing, but he has almost all of the connective parts that you might want. But Paige, where are you at with Karim Lopez at this point in the process?
Yeah, I mean, Karim Lopez, he doesn't have one elite skill, right? He's kind of like your typical jack of all trades type of player. And when you look at his frame and size and, his two-level scoring ability, you're kind of like, oh, he could possibly be, this 3-and-D type of archetype, right? He's shown enough flashes beyond the arc, right? But it's kind of comes down to that he's not elite at one skill. So where do you kind of put him into where he'll develop in the NBA, right? I mean, I posted a clip on Twitter yesterday of like it's his game's kind of a mixture of you go to a restaurant and it's kind of like a deal where you can get 3 appetizers, 2 entrees, and all of it goes together so well. But if you take one part off, it's still as good as the rest type of thing. And that's kind of how I describe his game is that he kind of needs all these things to be good because he doesn't have that one elite skill that you would want from him. And from last year to this year with the Breakers, he's upped his rim finishing to about 10%. He looks a lot more confident and stronger going to the rim, and he's productive, right? He's playing against grown men when he's 17 and 19 years old, right? And producing. He's also only, putting up 8 to 9 field goal attempts per game, right? But he's making the most out of it, and he plays very methodically, Nick, to his game. He's not the fastest guy on the court. He's not the most athletic guy on the court, but he gets to his spot. He gets to his spot well enough to, at least, get production out of that. And his second most play type was him being a pick and roll ball handler, right? And he's 6'9", 225. You mentioned, he plays a lot smaller than what he's actually listed as. And it's so true. I mean, the way he's coming off screens, getting into the mid-range, that's basically his bread and butter kind of inside the arc. And his shot looks great. He has a high release. He really snaps that wrist down. And he just bullies people to the rim. He'll go right through you. And for a guy, playing in the NBL and just, it's like play after play, he's just going through you and getting to the line, getting to his spots. I mean, there's some real two-way upside to his game. And obviously last night, the play-in, a lot of people are saying, oh, like Karim Lopez, like high ceiling is, Denny Avila, right? Like you can see a little bit too, that could be his ceiling. But I mean, Denny is such a special isolation scorer. And Kareem, he doesn't really play in the isolation that much. I believe isolation was like his second lowest play type. He was only in ISO scenarios 10% of the time, right? I mean, he's not really looking to, go at someone. He does have a nice handle for his size and his length, but I mean, it's still a little weaker. It's not as strong as I would want him to be if that was like his second main play type. Like he's not really looking for that. He needs a screen to go downhill most of the time, or in those situations where he gets a mismatch, he can capitalize on it with just his size, his ability to get downhill, and he just runs through you. But I mean, there's so much upside to him, and I think he will be the first international prospect taken in the draft.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the one sort of consistent thing that he did both last year and this year was essentially just spotting up, right? Like, sitting around waiting for the ball to swing his way, knocking down their shots. But he more than doubled his volume as the pick and roll ball handler, sort of what you mentioned, that became his second most common play type. And, he was solid in those plays, right? Decently above average, but not, some crazy kind of like, 1.5 points or, even 1 point per possession kind of, real engine of an offense. And yeah, a lot of it, it's interesting because as you mentioned, he barely ever isolated, but when he did isolate, he averaged nearly 1.3 points per possession, right? And again, small sample size, all of that, but 96th percentile in isolation, 91st percentile as a roll man in the pick and roll, which both of those to me sort of speak to a similar notion of him as, you're not running plays through him, but also you get him in the right situation. I mean, similar deal. He was also in the 81st percentile on post-ups, right? It's like, okay, if he gets isolated onto someone who, who is closer to the size that he plays at than the size that he is, it's easy for him to turn them around, to shoot over them, to, back them under the rim. And that's the kind of thing that doesn't necessarily come up at the NBA level in terms of like, oh, you can name a handful of players in the NBA where teams are like aiming to run post-up offense through them, right? But with Lopez, a lot of it comes down to if he gets a mismatch, he can and will attack that mismatch. And that's sort of where his feel for the game, basketball IQ, all of that comes into play, where if you put a smaller guy on him, he knows what to do with that. And so, again, I think easy for me to project sort of, and all of this is sort of wishy-washy, but the idealized 50th percentile version of Karim Lopez is like ninth or 10th man off the bench, which if you get that kind of player in late teens, early 20s in the draft, that's a good pick, right? Getting a long-term rotation player in that kind of range is a very valuable pickup. I think the flip side of that is, I don't know. I think the best way to put it is I think his floor is decently high. Like, I think the odds of him being an out and out bust are pretty slim. But, a lot of what we've already talked about of how he's sort of a jack of all trades, master of none, it's difficult for me to, one of the first things I said, right, is I'm not sure there's a world in which he scores 20 points a game. It's difficult for me to sort of envision, other than he goes from good to like elite as a shooter, it's tough for me to imagine sort of what the potential all-star version of Karim Lopez looks like. And if you're getting that player at 23, that's a win. If you're getting that player in the lottery, which, certainly that's where he was projected heading into last season, then it's a bit of a different calculus, and I'm not quite as high on it as I would be in terms of getting him to be the kind of contributing rotation piece that he's been in New Zealand.
Yeah. What you mentioned is that, he has shown flashes of him being able to score in isolation and, make the most out of mismatches in the post, right? He only had 20 field goal attempts post up and isolation combined. Like, that's not nearly enough sample size to go off of, right? But when he does, take those possessions, you see a little bit, of what he can do. But I don't think an NBA team is going to let him, do that right out of the gate, right? I think he has the potential. Right now, he's good. He has potential to be great just because of the upside. He's also young. He's played professional ball already. He has that two-way scoring ability as well. And he is also shooting 64% at the rim, right? And usually, the breakers where he would kind of start, in each corner as a spot up shooter and kind of come off, weak side pick and roll actions and kind of get, downhill that way. On spot ups this year, he was shooting 36% at 66 attempts. Like, it's there, right? The grasp of that is there. But when you pair that to, okay, he's not an elite shooter, but, he's efficient and confident in the mid range and at the rim, right? Surely, he has the same defensive juice, right? I think he's an okay defender, but what makes me think he can be great is his stock production. Nick, I mean, he had 68 stocks this year. He has the length for it. He has the wingspan for it. He has the instincts for it as well. The only thing is that when he is mismatched with stronger, quicker guards that are score first, and especially on the perimeter, he just leads with his hips way too much. And that's why he's also, one of the top players, like I think in the NBL of like drawing fouls per game at 3 per game, I believe. I mean, that's an issue, right? It's just knowing, how to control your body when these guards are obviously trying to bait you into getting a fall with you and shielding their body for you to, kind of lean into them. And even if you're walling up, they're still gonna get you and bait you, right? So he kind of struggles with that on the defensive end. But what makes me think he can be great is that he's so productive as a defensive disruptor in that sense. And he's improved from last year to this year in this sense too. I mean, last year he had quick math, 29 stocks, right, to nearly 70 stocks this year, right? I mean, he's improving year after year, and that's exactly what you want to see with a player archetype that, Karim Lopez is that, okay, the shot, he was kind of struggling towards the end of this year, right? But he had more attempts to a certain extent. But I mean, he's making it up for it and showing us a little bit more of his defensive game as well this year.
Yeah, and I was actually going to transition to that, and you beat me to the punch. So I appreciate that. You're saving us time here that I'm wasting by equivocating about it. But the stock production is, I think, the key thing for me to drill down on in terms of differences between last year and this year. And we talked about this before. I'm sure we'll talk about it again. But steal and block rates tend to be the most directly translatable for non-NBA level to NBA level, be that NBL to NBA or NCAA to NBA. And so the fact that he's improved in that area, and it's not, first of all, it's not, crazy like, 10% block rate or, something way out there like that, right? But, it is a significant improvement in that regard. And also, I think, unlike with some of the offensive stuff where a lot of what he does is, sort of, again, jack of all trades, master of none, filling gaps, that kind of deal. I think there's a lot more room for him to grow on the defensive end in a way that, the fact that he's made the step forward that he's made this year, while also not having like a crazy jump in fouls, like per minute, he actually fouled less this year than he did last year, which again, it's one of those things where there are players who, improve those numbers by just taking a lot more gambles and that leading to bad defensive possessions. With Lopez, that's not as much of the deal. And so I do wonder if the sort of best version of Karim Lopez that we get is closer to, I don't know, I mean it's the wrong position, but somewhere in the Drew Holiday realm. I wanted to say Chris Middleton, but I think Chris Middleton was much more proficient of a scorer than I think Karim Lopez is ever going to be. But that kind of ideal, right? Of like, maybe I never become more than the third or fourth option offensively. But I mean, with his size, with his fluidity at his size, with his competitive fire, I mean, again, like watching him last year as a 17-year-old just charging towards the rim and, screaming as he's throwing down dunks over people, is like, that's the kind of energy you want to see from someone who you expect to be a major defensive piece. And the fact that he improved in the way that he did as a stocks guy, I think is really helpful on that front. The fact that he did that while also fouling less, to me, that says, okay, you're figuring things out. You're not just being more aggressive. Not that being more aggressive is necessarily a bad thing, but there are players who I worry about their aggression, and Karim Lopez is not one of them. So for him to show what he has shown in terms of growth on the defensive end this year, to me, that's almost more encouraging than the shooting stuff, especially since after he had that cold stretch down the year, the shooting stuff didn't quite look like it did in, say, December when he was like just shy of 40%, I think it was. Not where he ended the season, but certainly in terms of the defensive stuff, he showed real growth there.
Yeah, I mean, he's shown he can be a connective defensive disruptor, right? I mean, he has the length, he has the size. He's your typical, 3-4 that can kind of come off the bench and give you valuable minutes on defensive end that you don't really have to worry about. But he can also, add extra possessions, right, too. And, he's not the best playmaker, right, on the offensive end, but he did a lot better than last year, right? I mean, if you look at his assist to turnover ratio, it's about 1.3 on the year. And some of the passes he makes, Nick, are very impressive. Like, while I was preparing for this podcast, I'm watching them and I'm like, how did he get that off? Like, how did he thread the needle like that? Does he have eyes in the back of his head? I mean, they're very high level passes, but there's also some, throwaway turnovers in there too, right?
Yeah.
So kind of finding that, level out with him in terms of his playmaking. But I mean, the vision is there, the instincts are there. He has the feel for it because he's shown that on defensive end, right? In terms of his steal and block rate. So I think there's a lot more confidence that I have in him since last year of just, he's playing like how I would picture him playing if he were in the NBA compared to last year, of what his kind of role would be in the upcoming years.
Yeah, his playmaking was more actualized this year than it was. Yeah. Like there were, again, watching him, even for, catching up for this podcast and also just, catching up in general, I think I probably still watched more of him last year than I have of him this year. And the flashes were still there last year. But, again, this year it was, he was going for it a lot more. And also, like, again, last year his assist to turnover ratio was negative, right? So even though there were moments when he's like, wow, how did this 17-year-old kid see this pass that, guys 10 years older than him don't consistently miss, right? And, other than, yeah, it's really hard to sort of figure out, like, okay, what didn't, like technically his free throw percentage dipped by such a tiny amount that it's barely even worth mentioning. Really, honestly, the free throw rate dip was more of an issue to me than, he shot 73.9% as opposed to 74.2%. Like, whatever. Like, he's more than good enough in that area. It's one of those things where it would be easier to project touch if he was shooting 84%, but again, he's shown much more as a three-point shooter this year than he did last year, in a way that it's easy to sort of buy him continuing to grow in that area. But especially with the passing stuff, again, it's like, as he makes the transition over to the NBA side of things and presumably plays a similar, if not smaller, role in his team's offense, everything that he can do without the ball in his hands is going to be more important next year. And so the fact that by pretty much any measure you can think of, his off-ball offense has improved, all of that is really encouraging. And again, it's one of those things where I think there's a lot higher chance of players drafted near him being busts than he is. But also, if you're sort of spinning the roulette wheel, it's a little bit more difficult for me to say this guy's going to be, multi-time All-NBA, All-Star, wildly successful, future Hall of Famer type than someone like, I'm trying to think of a good example just wildly off the top of my head here. I'll cheat and go with an easy one and say, hey, Cam Carr, right? Like, okay, they'll probably be in relatively similar ranges in the draft, but, given Cam Carr's athleticism, given his elite shooting, given what he's shown as a playmaker, it's like, okay, maybe the 20th percentile version of Cam Carr is a lot worse player than Karim Lopez, but some teams need rotation pieces and some teams need home run swings. And so if you're a home run swing team, maybe take Cam Carr. If you're, we desperately need an eighth man with size kind of team, Karim Lopez might make more sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes down to what teams need and how can Karim Lopez kind of fill that void for them when you're getting him, late first round, possibly, in the middle there. Because I'm on my big board, I have him at, I believe, 19, so just a little bit above. I mean, one spot above the consensus, but yeah. I think I'm a little bit more high on just his upside and his offensive juice, because if you're, getting the value that he has, like it's hard for me to bet against, a 19-year-old that has such insane flashes and has that size and length and has that motor to them that has produced with not a lot of, time in between at, are already the professional level. So I think, he has that in his, bag of tricks to kind of go back off of. But I think, if I'm a team that, is in the 18 to 30 range, Karim Lopez is at the top of my list, right? I mean, just in terms of upside, and I think he'd be a perfect piece to build along with, other pieces that, you get from free agency or trades or, whatever higher in the draft, right? It just depends what team is looking more for upside or kind of, a safer bet with, Cam Carr that, he's one of our guys that, we love here on Deep Dives that just has a little bit more, obviously, shooter athleticism, right? And that Karim Lopez isn't a bad athlete, right? He's just like he's just a different type of athlete than, a Cameron Carr, right? He's not gonna jump out of the gym, right? But he has these stunts that, he is athletic, he can play above the rim. I believe he had 32 dunks on the year, right? And most of them are two-footed, two-handed, right? There's some where, he gets across the screen and kind of, goes to the rim because he's so ferocious and tenacious going to the rim. And he shows off that, kind of like grit to him, right? He has that kind of fire that I think, any team that gets him in that value range is going to be happy with what the foundation that he at least has right now to work off of.
For sure. And I don't have my board in front of me, but I believe I have him either like last pick of the lottery at 14 or like slightly lower than that. And the reason for that in my mind is he's got such a wide array of complementary skills that, if it's, he doesn't have the one thing to hang his hat on, but if he goes to a team that just needs him to shoot, he's got that. If he goes to a team that, needs him to spend more of his energy on the defensive end of the floor, I think he's shown real signs of improvement in that area as well. But in terms of the athleticism, I just keep going back to the fluidity. Like, most people who are as big as him don't move. Again, he's got good vertical athleticism, but he's not got Cam Carr vertical athleticism. But there aren't many 6'9" guys who can move his feet, who can flip his hips in the way that Karim Lopez does. And, maybe the ceiling isn't quite as high as it is for some players that will be taken around his range. But Karim Lopez is one of those guys where I'm struggling to see the version of him that fails completely. And, once you get to the middle of the first round, there are going to be teams that just need, another competent piece in the forward room, wherever you want to play him other than point guard or center. He's going to figure out things that he can do to be helpful. So, again, maybe doesn't have the craziest ceiling, but I also everything I've said about him being safe, I think is waylaid by the fact of, given how flexible he is and given how much he's improved as a shooter, maybe next year is the year where he just explodes onto the scene and all of what I've said just sounds really dumb. But the baseline for him is so high that I think once you get to around the middle of the first round, it's like, well, we need another guy in our rotation. Do we take the home run swing, or do we take the guy who we're confident can fit in and play relatively early? And I don't want to elide his star upside by any means, but I think it's much more likely that he turns out to be, okay, this is a really solid rotation piece who we can continue to grow with guys who are more willing to be the offensive engine around him, rather than sort of asking him to be the main guy.
Yeah, I mean, this draft is one of the best drafts in recent history, right? Especially for guards, but also for these archetypes that are like Karim Lopez, jack of all trades type of guys. Yeah. I mean, there's so much value of having options, right? And with his game, you have options of how he can play for you and giving your specific scheme, team, players, right? He can work around anyone, right? Which is what you want at, the value that you're going to get with him in the first round.
I don't think we can close on a better note than that. So shall we move on to player number 2?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So I kind of teased this up top, but this is another international player, but one who was not playing international basketball this past season. So, Paige, why did you decide to go with Hannes Steinbach for this week?
Yeah, I chose Hannes Steinbach because I just figured I would do another Big Ten player, and kind of I feel like I'm surprised, honestly, we haven't talked about him until now. And it's almost end of April. So, and he just declared for the draft yesterday too. Maybe he realized we were going to make an episode talking about him, and he's like, okay, let me, throw these guys a bone so people don't come after them and be like, why are you guys picking guys that didn't declare? But
I hope anyway, they're not doing that.
But he's the best rebounder in the draft, right, Nick? I mean, he's 6'11", about 220 pounds, 19 years old, played for Washington this year, 18.5 points per game, 11.8 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 2.3 stocks per game, shooting 58% from the field, 34% from three, and nearly 35 minutes per game. He had 16 20-plus point games this year, 23 double-doubles, led the NCAA in total rebounds, 69 stocks. I mean, I can go on and on about this guy's capability on the defensive end and offensive end. I mean, he's shown, elite 2A upside, right? I mean, this guy will run through a wall for a rebound. That's like the best explanation I can think of, because when you're looking at when he was against Yaxel and Ademara, right? I mean, Ademara 7'3", right? Yaxel 6'9". They are, ferocious attackers at the rim, right? They're gonna, Dusty May is all about, hey guys, like, you guys need to get every single possession for us, no matter what. And Hannes is kind of like, oh, I don't really care. Like, I'm just gonna rip it away from Ademara and go up with it. Maybe he'll miss, but he'll get his own rebound and then he'll go to the line. He's going to the line like 5.3 times per game and shooting, I think, nearly don't think it's 80%, but it's nearly where is it at? Yeah, 76%. I mean, he's just an attacker, ferocious piece that if you're looking at, getting him at the later end of the first round, it would be a no-brainer for me because he shows that he is fluid, he's mobile, he's athletic, he's 6'11", but he runs the floor so well in transition, and he's also just everywhere. I mean, it doesn't matter if and his body language also tells a lot too. Like, he doesn't really care if he misses a shot at the rim because he knows he's going to get it and put it back up again. Like, he's just a garbage can type of, big man, that he's just a cleanup guy. Right. But he can also, kick it out to his teammates. He can also operate behind the arc too. I believe, this stat was insane, Nick. But he's shooting 50% off pick and pops. And besides, being a roller as the pick and roll man, he's electing to go to pop out more than he's rolling 47% of the time. Like, he's actively looking to, that be his shot. Right. And the last 10 or so games for the season, he shot 8 of 22 from 3-point range, 36%. And I like his mechanics. I mean, he's balanced. He has a good quick release, high release. He's poised. He's calm. Some of his misses, though, were absurd. I mean, he had some pretty bad misses throughout the season, kind of just missing the backboard completely, hitting off the front rim, airballing. Like, some of the misses were interesting of like, for a guy that, he's actively looking to pick and pop most of the time when he's not really a consistent 3-point shooter, but then he has misses like that. It's like, how much control does he actually have beyond the arc? But I mean, the upside's there, right? I mean, I could go on and on about, his defensive rebound percentages, his rebound rate, but I like his motor. He has good length and size. He runs the floor well. He's an adequate defender on the perimeter. He does get caught, obviously, sometimes with the faster guards, like, normally any big man will be, right? But he has, that skill level, that feel and touch where he's going to be in every possession, whether you like it or not, and he's going to make his presence known.
Yeah, so Steinbach is an interesting one for many different reasons. So way back in, it feels like forever ago at this point, but when I ran the deep dives model that I put out a few months ago, Steinbach was he had the best statistical line of anybody in that model, and that included Cam Boozer. And granted, part of that was at the time I ran it, he was shooting 38% from 3-point range. But, a few of the other numbers, his scoring was right about at that point where it was, just under 20 points a game, just under 12 rebounds a game. Like, some of those numbers really didn't change all that much. Really the only thing that changed was his 3-point percentage went down slightly. But I'm struggling to think of many players who have the potential to be the kind of stretch five that Steinbach can be, in the sense of, most of the time when you're putting in a big who can shoot, you're sacrificing something in the paint, right? It's like, they're going to be spending a lot of their time out on the perimeter, so they're not going to be getting offensive rebounds. They're not going to be, and the fact that Steinbach is, again, shooting potential really more than, sort of, I'm 100% confident in the kind of shooter he's going to be. The wild misses are one thing that, definitely worth mentioning. The fact that he only took 53 on the year tells me, okay, it's not 100% sure of that sample size being real. But man, I mean, what he does on the interior and on the glass, while also having that potential to be a stretch guy, the term unicorn was invented for this kind of player, right? And maybe I'm missing somebody who it was used with frequently before Kristaps Porzingis, but that was sort of the first big usage of unicorn in NBA draft terms that I can remember of, so this guy's huge, but he also can shoot and handle the ball and also be a shot blocking threat. And I do want to get into the defense more with Steinbach in a minute, but that really is what sort of stands out to me first and foremost is, small sample size aside, sure, but there aren't going to be many guys who can shoot 34% from 3-point range and also grab 24 rebounds in a game. He had 24 rebounds against USC.
Yeah, I mean, I love these, production big man that they're not all, their main thing isn't, they're your main shot blocker, or they're just gonna hang out in the dunker spot and, clean up the boards for you and, shoot 75% at the rim, right? Hannes Steinbach can do all of that and then some and then some and then some. I mean, he is constantly in every possession. And I think in the NBA level, like I could see him being, if the shot doesn't come along, production level as like an iHeart, right? But if the shot is there, Vucevic, right? A little bit. Obviously, Hannes Steinbach's a little bigger than Vucevic, but like his presence and the way, he cleans out the boards and you can knock down, I think he's shooting like 32% from 3-point range off of like 2 attempts this year. But I mean, and he's on the Celtics right now too, and he's making a huge impact, right? So I think there's a lot of possibilities with him. I think fit is very important. On our latest mock draft, I guess, subtle plug, but we had him going 29th, I believe, to the Cleveland Cavaliers, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because their front court has been the same for quite some time. There's been talks about, kind of switching up with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen. I could definitely see him, coming in, and he has that offensive upside too, that he has those flashes of being more than, he can be possibly a consistent shooter from beyond the arc, but he has that touch and feel. He's light on his feet. He's going to run the floor at full speed. He's going to give 100%, all the time. And I could definitely see, Spida throwing up, home run passes to him in transition, or, getting his misses and throwing it back out to him. He's everywhere. He's a type of player where you just can't ignore his production, and to come in as a freshman and average nearly 20 points per game, over 11 rebounds per game, and still make an effort to, shoot from beyond the arc. And also, like, he kept Washington in so many games, Nick, by himself, right? I mean, he's not going to be, that high of a usage player at the NBA level, right? I mean, he was basically the offensive engine that, kept the Huskies running, and he did a very good job of it. So I think fit is not as important, but I also think if he goes to the right team, he can make an impact right away. And I think the Cavs would be an awesome fit for him.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said earlier, which is he can do everything, but just to sort of add a little more, it's that he does. It's that he already does, right? It's not, oh, well, theoretically, he could maybe it's like, no, he's already in the 77th percentile as a spot-up guy. Like, you read down some of the synergy numbers, it's like, oh, 95th percentile offensively, but also 94th percentile in transition, 92nd percentile in the half court. Like, his most frequent plays, as you mentioned, were him, being pick and roll man and popping a lot of the time. And those were his least efficient plays, and he was still above average on those looks. Again, it's not just, oh, well, if he does X, if he does Y, it's like he already does X and Y. It's just how much of X, if, X is having the offense run through him, like how much of X is he going to get to do at the NBA level? Well, maybe not all that much, but when you're almost 7 feet tall and you grab 12 rebounds a game and you're an 82nd percentile jump shooter, it's like, it's similar to the Karim Lopez thing in terms of like, there's a lot of different things that he does, but I think the key difference is there are a couple things that Steinbach is elite at in the way that Lopez is. I mean, 68% shooting around the rim, those rebounding numbers that we've brought up a few of them. Here's another fun one. 15% offensive rebounding. It's like, you don't see that from players. I mean, first of all, you don't really see that from players ever, but you certainly don't see that from players who are also averaging just under 19 points a game, right? It's like, it's the fact that he's already shown, no, it's not that I can do these things. It's that I will do these things. And it's just, which of the things that I'm good at do you want me to do? And I think the flip side with the Lopez comparison is there are ways that I could see it not working for Steinbach, just in the sense of, hey, you're not going to be able to bully NBA players to the degree that you were interior, for Washington. And I wouldn't be surprised if next season Karim Lopez averages more points per game than Hannes Steinbach. But man, it's like teams really, really want stretch big men who are like actual real shooters. And sample size aside, I do believe in the shooting, especially since, as you mentioned, he gets to the line as much as he does and shoots as well as he does at the charity stripe. Also, his at rim numbers being what they are, and the fact that he's this absolutely nuts rebounder. It's like, okay, maybe there are situations that wouldn't work where Lopez would, but the flip side of that is it's not a jack of all trades thing. It's like there are two or three things that he's spectacular at, and then just the question of how real is the shooting is one thing, but more than that, it's hard to find players who are as prolific on the boards as he is that also have the kind of range to their offensive game, because usually guys who are rebounders like that, they're not shooting outside of 5 feet.
Yeah, and just to go off another rebounding stat for him, he has a 25% defensive rebound rate, which is absurd. And he's also shooting, you mentioned 36% off spot ups, but he's also shooting 34% off the catch, guarded at 40%, right? So I mean, I think sometimes like I overthink these type of players because as you mentioned, he's a center, right? He's 6'11", 225 pounds, but yes, he's obviously overpowering, college guys down low because he's just an elite at, three things that when you find all those three things in a big man like him, you're not going to find that really at the college level, right? But at the NBA, you have like 10, you have so many to choose from. And it's kind of like, is he going to be able to, have that same production and feel as his NBA career goes on? I'm not quite sure because he's not, the most athletic big, right? He doesn't have that shot blocking nature to his game. Yes, he, can hold his own. He can wall up. He does, make people miss at the rim. I believe people are only shooting 40% against him at the rim. And he also has that transition to his back too. He's not, he doesn't have bricks for feet, right? Like he's light on his feet. He's athletic. He has that to his game. But that is worrisome of like, okay, how is he going to, go against a Jalen Duren that's just going to, overpower him at the rim, or a Giannis, or, Mitchell Robinson, right? I mean, it goes on and on of like those hyper athletic, big man that will just, go through you at the rim, right? They're not really going to look for, play on the perimeter, which Hannes has shown that he can, right, with the Big Ten and everything of, they're big mans, right? Like he can guard out off the perimeter, but I mean, if he's not doing that, he can hold his own, but I'm not as confident of like, okay, if he's just in the dunker spot, guarding around the rim, I'm more confident when he's kind of like, I could see him being like a 4 or 5 kind of at the NBA level of just, I'm not as confident as athleticism as I would be if he was, above the rim, shot blocker, big man.
I think that's a really important point. In college, there are players who just, combination of size and effort can get, really great rebounding numbers. And the problem is when you hit the NBA, those guys are, just as psychopathically competitive, but they're also just better athletes, right? It's like no one should be questioning, Jalen Duren or Mitchell Robinson's want to in terms of, them being around the basket. But it's like, I mean, shout out to my guy, Reggie Evans, who I absolutely loved watching play because he was just this hilariously weird, play style of like in the Dennis Rodman mold of like, 0 points and 18 rebounds were very possible on any given night. But it's like, other than those extremely rare exceptions, most of those guys who are crazy around the rim players are either much bigger or much more athletic, or quite frankly, sometimes both.
Yeah.
And so with Steinbach, again, it's like, do I expect him to be a really, really good rebounder at the NBA level? Yes, of course I do, right? It's like, you don't get 12 rebounds a game by accident. But will he be as dominant? odds are extremely in favor of no, he will not be as dominant. And so then the question becomes, again, it's one of those things where if he weren't shooting 68% around the rim, I'd be a lot more worried, because then it would be, sort of in the mold of end of career Ryan Anderson. And I say end of career specifically because, after he got hurt and missed a bunch of time, he came back and he had one more season and was out of the league by the time he was 30. And I think that was a lot more due to him being hurt than the game moving past him. But also the game had moved past him, in a way that it wasn't all that surprising when that ended up being the end of his career. And, again, with Steinbach, it's especially with the offensive rebounding, because so much of that is just effort. He's got that down. But, either he's going to need to establish more firmly that, yes, I am a real deal shooter and I'll be a real deal shooter with higher volume as well. But again, it's I keep going back to, you don't get 12 rebounds a game by accident.
Yeah.
And so whether or not the rest of his profile translates is an open question, but I'm willing to bet that he'll still be a really strong finisher around the rim who gets a ton of rebounds and gets himself to the line because, he's grabbing contested rebounds and getting whacked while he's doing it, as he was all year at Washington.
And one of the most translatable skills in the NBA is rebounding, right? Yeah. I'm not picturing that he's going to average what he's averaging at Washington in his first year of the NBA, right? Maybe half that, right? Just depends where he goes. But I'm confident that his rebounding and his motor there and his finishing around the basket is going to stay the same, no matter how many minutes he gets, no matter what team he goes to. That's going to be his bread and butter and kind of his selling aspect to teams. It's hey, I am an A+ tier at these 3 things. And there's these 4 or 5 things where I've shown flashes of, if you give me time and I develop with you guys, I'm going to be able to, you're going to get a good ROI on me if you choose to draft me. So I think for him, it's just going to come down to what teams value in him, right? Cause I could obviously see him going higher or later too. I mean, you never really know how the draft goes, right? Every year, but it will be very interesting to see where he goes. But in terms of ceiling, right, I think Karim does have him beat a little bit just because of his player archetype and nature. And I'm just a little bit more confident about him, having played, with the Breakers for 2 years and having his production improve. And I just am a little bit more confident on the offensive side of his game. But with Hannes, it's kind of hard to make it too as a big man when he doesn't really have that playmaking hub to him as well. If he did, I would probably say the opposite of that. I think I believe more in his ceiling too. So it's kind of that's a question too, but he doesn't, right? So kind of have to play it right how it is. But he does, he's averaging 1.2 assists per game. He does make some good reads, here and there. But I mean, when you're asked to do everything for your team, when he's not going to be asked to do that at the NBA level, I think he's going to kind of mellow that out a little bit and be a little bit consistent in terms of being an offensive playmaker.
Yeah. And, he does have a negative assist to turnover ratio, but I'm less concerned about that with him than I am with many other players. Just, for the simple fact of something we've talked about a lot, which is, hey, if you have a heavy scoring burden, you're going to have some turnovers that aren't oh, I made a bad pass and it got picked off, right? It's if you're posting up at the frequency that he was, every once in a while you're going to get stripped. And so pure assist to turnover ratio doesn't necessarily tell the whole story for players like him, but you'd also want that to be higher than 1.5, 1.2 assists per game. I do want to touch, we've touched on it briefly here and there, but I do want to sort of circle back to the defensive stuff, because something that you brought up that I think is an important part of the discussion is maybe he's a 4, maybe he's a 5. And that's where the defensive stuff comes into play of, it's not like he's a bad shot blocker, but it's also he can't be your only guy back there. And so that's where I think the 4-5 discussion that you brought up becomes a lot more interesting, in the sense of, if you pair him with someone who can be that interior guy, then maybe he floats a little bit more. And, that's where the fact that he's relatively limber for a player of his size. Again, I don't think he's anywhere near the athlete that Lopez is, or that, I would say he is right about average for his size, whereas Lopez, I would say, is, especially in terms of fluidity, pretty far above average for 6'9" guy. But with Steinbach, again, it's like he can block shots if he's in the right place. He doesn't foul too much, although 2.5 fouls per game it's not fantastic, but it's relatively reasonable for the kind of defensive role that he plays. Again, it's just a matter of, I think either teams are going to have to say this is just an all offense lineup, and like we're hoping that we have an offensive rating of 150 and they have an offensive rating of, like offensive rating 150, defensive rating 140. Hey, we're still outscoring them, but maybe the defense doesn't look all that pretty. I guess the thing with that, though, is that especially if the shooting does turn out to be real, and I have more confidence in him than I would say, than I do for the average person who only took 53s in their college season. Even still, it's like the offensive fit makes it a lot easier to just plug in whatever other big man makes sense defensively. Like you have someone who's going to be your floor spacer among the big man crew if Steinbach is in, but he needs more help defensively. Whereas, if we're specifically comparing to Lopez to me is a lot more, hey, plug me into a scheme, I'm going to be valuable, versus Steinbach is like, maybe there are weird lineups that are just so good offensively that it doesn't matter, but you have to make things work with him defensively in a way that you don't necessarily for, honestly, if he was 2 inches taller, I think this discussion might be a bit easier, or maybe not. I don't know. But, the idea there being he needs another piece alongside him in a way that maybe narrows the scope of teams that'll be looking his way.
Yeah, when I was kind of like thinking of, an NBA comp for him as well, I was also kind of leaning towards like Kyle Filipowski, like a little bit. I think with Filipowski, I think he was obviously he was a better playmaker than, Steinbach was in college, but they're pretty similar in the sense of, because he's also been having a pretty great year for the Jazz this year, because I could see him kind of having that, development that Kyle Filipowski is in the NBA, and kind of his role being too. I mean, Kyle Filipowski's averaging 11.4 points, 7.2 rebounds, 2.6 assists, and he's shooting nearly 35% from three. So on nearly 3 attempts per game, because I could see him having that kind of, progression. But I mean, also, the Jazz, they were tanking obviously this year too. And, Jaren Jackson's in the mix too on the squad, obviously with Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler. So I could see him, being paired with an athletic, hyper, rim protector next to him, right? Because if you have this guy that, okay, like, yes, I can be a rim protector, but I don't need to be your main one because I have this guy, at my back end, helping me out. But I can, guard on the perimeter, or, run out in transition, and we can play that, high to low game, 2-man action. I could definitely see that happening. And that's why when we picked him, to the Cavs, I was like, that would be awesome to watch too. So yeah, I think, that's kind of the best case scenario if you go somewhere that already has an established big man that can, if the Suns had a pick, I'd be like, oh, like Mark Williams, but they don't. So
there you go.
But yeah, I'm super excited about his outlook and development.
Yeah, the Filipowski comparison makes a lot of sense. And certainly I think a positive in Steinbach's column is Filipowski took a huge step forward defensively in his sophomore year at Duke. And, if we're talking about Steinbach, Filipowski was a very young freshman, which throws off the age side of the calculation a little bit. But if you're thinking about Steinbach from that perspective, it's like, well, he, had his breakout performance in the U19 World Cup, goes to Washington, clearly builds on that, World Cup performance, has a great year, but the defensive stuff is a little bit further behind. But Steinbach, there we go. Steinbach blocked twice as many shots as Filipowski did in his freshman year, which, to me, that says, okay, maybe that portends something for Steinbach that, once he has more time to figure it out, he can grow as a shot blocker. And certainly, I mean, he did a lot better as an interior defender as the season went along too, which is, also a hugely positive sign, especially given how thoroughly exhausted he must have been on the offensive end with having to carry the entire Washington Huskies offense on his back. And that is not a problem that Kyle Filipowski had to deal with at Duke. So yeah, I think the comparison makes a lot of sense. And if he has the kind of defensive step forward next year that Filipowski had in his second year at Duke, then that makes a whole lot of the defensive calculation easier, because it's less imperative that you have someone else alongside him if he can take that step forward.
Yeah, and I would argue too, like they're kind of similar athletic wise too. I think it could go either way about who's actually more athletic, but I think in similar circumstances, I think Hannes is better in transition. I think he's more lighter on his feet. Filipowski always seemed to me a little bit too stiff at times in college at Duke, and also with Steinbach playing in a role that he probably won't play in the NBA and producing the way he is, I'm very a lot more confident in his role and production in the NBA, and just capitalizing off that too in one season with the Huskies.
All right, shall we move on to quick hits and wrap this one up?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we are recording this on Wednesday the 15th, shortly before the play-in games, but we have a couple of play-in games already in the books to talk about. And interesting Miami Heat Charlotte Hornets game, which I have to admit I was not expecting that to be as close as it was. I was kind of expecting the Heat to sort of bow out in humiliating fashion. Not to be unkind to Heat fans, but Charlotte's been on an absolute heater for months now, and that game still ended up being a lot closer than expected. And we don't need to talk about LaMelo Ball, so we can talk about everything else in that game.
Yeah, I think it was the biggest game in Hornets history, right? In a very long time.
I was about to say Larry Johnson might have something to say about that.
In a very long time. You could the videos, the pictures I've been seeing, the fans have been literally starving for this type of atmosphere, and the crowd pop when Melo hit, the game-winning shot. Miles Bridges had that block to end it. That's one of the best atmospheres that you can ask for as a fan. I can't imagine what Hornets fans were feeling in that moment. And when I was watching the game, I was like, there's no way the Hornets have not pulled away yet. Obviously Khan didn't have the best game, right? But I think he's going to bounce back for the first round. And I think obviously the LaMelo and Bam thing, we're not going to go, too deep into it, but Eric Spoelstra obviously touched on it after the game. But the game's over, right? You got to kind of move on. But I mean, the two play-in games yesterday, Nick, what more can you ask for the play-in? I'm not a huge play-in fan personally, but those were two great games to watch. Those were legit playoff games that you're not going to have anything better in the play-in than those two games right there.
It's kind of funny because obviously we just finished out the NCAA tournament, about a week ago. And that atmosphere is the one thing that works the best about the play-in. And, granted, I'm a fan of a team that last 2 years got blown out in embarrassing fashion in the play-in, and that was the end of their season. And, I have a feeling you might have a slightly more positive view on the play-in if Phoenix were the 6th seed instead of the 7th seed, but, it's fine. But no, I think It is funny looking at the standings and sort of realizing how stark the divide has become between, we're trying versus we're extremely not trying. And it's there is no larger, it's really funny to look at the standings, actually. If you can pull up the standings, those listening at home, I encourage you to, because it is hilarious that the largest gap in both conferences is between the 10th seed and the 11th seed. And it's 11 games in both cases. So it's okay, so this is clearly the line. But I think, the sort of clamoring around the tanking situation kind of loses the point to me, in the sense of that used to be the 8th seed, 9th seed, right? It's it hasn't changed all that much. If anything, there are actually more teams that are trying because, in theory, you can be the 9-10, right? Like Atlanta last year was the 10 seed, weren't they? And they worked their way into the playoffs. It gives more chances for teams lower down. And so, I think it was 2 years ago when like there was this gigantic gap between the 9 and 10. I'm trying to remember what it was, but there was sort of this, this awful 10 seed is unworthy of being in the playoffs. Like Miami was above 500 and Golden State not quite, but every other team in the Western Conference field was above 500. It's not like terrible teams are, getting this playoff chance that they weren't going to get otherwise. I don't know. The sort of anti-tanking noise has seemed a lot louder this year than it has in previous years. And it's odd to me because this year doesn't seem like the year to be having that kind of clamoring, given that all the teams that were trying continued to try and all the teams that were out of it were out of it long before we got to the play-in part of the discussion. But certainly in terms of just, being interesting, fun basketball games, that's really all you could hope for. And for a play-in game to go to overtime and, be this raucous, crowd-raising last-minute win, that's everything you could have hoped for out of this situation. And adding that single game elimination thing into the NBA side of things, I don't know. Not the worst idea I've ever heard.
That's fair. I mean, what it is just more basketball. Right?
There you go.
But I do think, so the 7 and 8 seed play, the loser of that game plays the winner of the 9 and 10, right? Where even if you're better than the 9 and 10 seed, right, you still could get out by playing them, right? Which you kind of get screwed, right? And then moving on to, the second playing game yesterday, the Suns and the Blazers, right? The winner of that game got to play the Spurs. So the Blazers will play the Spurs. I'm a Suns fan. That game was an all-time collapse. I mean, we actually have a curse, Nick, in playoff game. Like I just knew, like in my heart, I was like, okay, like we got this, like we can do this, whatever. Like very confident, had it in. But in my head, I was like, we're gonna like find a way to mess it up, and we always do. And like same with Luka, like Denny Avila, like he's a superstar, Nick. I mean, every single time he touched the ball, it was an automatic finish at the rim. We don't know how to play point of attack defense. I just keep ranting. I mean, we had the last possession, we had Goodwin on him. We didn't have Oso or Mark Williams, at the rim, trying to protect the rim, right? I mean, we just let him get there, easy and one to, close it out. And we were up like 11 points, I believe, with 3 minutes to go. A lot of questionable decisions, but I mean, that's kind of, if you're a Suns fan, you understand the, emotion that comes with that. I mean, you do too, Nick, being a Kings fan, but I mean, yeah. Denny Avila, I mean, he's a star. I mean, he had, let's just go through his stat line. 41 points, 12 assists, 7 rebounds, 2 blocks. He was 3 of 8 from the 3. Also, the Suns didn't hit a 3 until halftime, I believe. So, I mean, you can't really do a lot there. They were 9 of 25 from 3. Portland was 17 for 47. So
that's not what you want.
Yeah. So that's not what you want. So,
well, if it makes you feel better, one of the games that is absolutely burned into the recesses of my mind is Kings Suns last year, where the Suns were down 22 points and they made up a 22-point deficit in the final 8 minutes. So, if you're having bad memories about it, just remember. I will say, to just very quickly avoid the adding that I was almost certainly about to get, it was Miami that was the 10 seed last year that made their way through the play-in. And also the gap that I was referring to was also last year, in that the 8 seed Grizzlies were 48 and 34 and the 9 seed Kings were 40 and 42. So, again, it's one of those things where I think last year that gap between 8 and 9 made people think, oh no, it's just going to be this awful team making its way out of the play-in. And this year, Portland and the Clippers had literally identical 42 and 40 records. And On the Eastern Conference side of things, Orlando at 8, 45 and 37, Charlotte at 9, 44 and 38, Miami at 10, 43 and 39. So again, pretty much all cases, the 8, 9, 10 are going to be pretty closely bunched together. And if the tanking all season long group goes from the 14 teams outside of the top 8 to the 10 teams outside of the top 10, that's probably a better outcome. But just a little bit of housekeeping so I can avoid the inevitable storm.
Yeah, I mean, the Blazers, I feel like they've been so underlooked this year, Nick. And I think obviously on the national stage, they're generally going to get talked about more, right? But I mean, Denny Avila, he is the next guy up, I think. I mean, and the Blazers, they have such a awesome young core too. I mean, Suns legend, Tamani Kamara. I mean, I could watch that guy play defense all day. And then Donovan Cleaning, he only had 2 points, but he had 11 rebounds, he's just a force, right? So, yeah, I mean, and then Scoot, he's back to playing, Scoot Henderson basketball, which is always nice. And, they added Drew Holiday. But tonight, Magic, 76ers, Warriors, Clippers. What are your picks, Nick, real quick?
I'm going to go Clippers and Sixers.
Yeah. Okay.
Orlando has had a very weird year. I'm not sure they're going to stick around much longer. And on the other side of things, I mean, the Warriors have done a valiant job to limp their way this far into the playoff picture, but I would not bet against the healthy Kawhi Leonard version of the Clippers. Even with James Harden in a different uniform, I still think that they're the team to beat. So those are my picks for what they're worth.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Magic has just been such a weird season for them. Like, I just feel awkward about even picking them, honestly, against the 76ers. And then, I mean, I'm not going to bet against a healthy Kawhi in the playoffs. So.
Yeah, I will say it was a very interesting experience to watch Celtics Magic end of season game in a pizzeria in Brooklyn and be more aware than usual of just how anti-Celtics the room was as Orlando just basically lay down and gave up that game in the second half. And that was not a pro-Celtics atmosphere, which, is pretty frequent for most New Yorkers, but it was still really funny to be there watching that absolute lie down of a game and be like, there are way too many Magic fans in this building who aren't actually, Magic fans, but we all know who we're rooting for in this one.
Yeah, we all know that feeling when we're in places like that.
There we go. All right. Anything else before we wrap this one up?
No, all good.
All right. So she is Paige Otto. You can find her on social media at PaigeOtto_. You can find me on social media at NBA Johnson. If you've been enjoying the show, please be sure to leave a rating and a review in whichever podcast player you might be using. 5 stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. Always much appreciated. If you're checking us out on YouTube, you can find us No Ceilings NBA, No Ceilings TV, and leave a like and subscribe on the video. If you've been enjoying the show, feel free to reach out to us with feedback on the deep dive specific portion of the show, either via the aforementioned social media channels, or you can shoot me an email, nickaj.nba@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.